Hey beer and brew fans, and welcome to Something About Beer. Over the years, I've adopted a number of processes that have really improved my beer quality and also my shelf life. Today, I want to share my thoughts on oxygen-free keg transfer. So let's get into it. Hey beer and brew fans, and welcome to Something About Beer. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about closed transfer kegging. Now, oxygen kills beer. That is a fact. Well, when I say kills, what I actually mean is spoil. Leaving aside those few styles that actually benefit from a little oxidation, we don't want oxygen anywhere near our finished beer. Oxygen is actually a horrible gas, apart from keeping us alive, of course. Cut an apple in half and within a short period of time it goes brown. Well, that's oxidation. It is a highly corrosive gas, and in too much of a high percentage actually can be fatal to humans. No wonder then that beer can so easily be oxidized and go stale even if the smallest amount gets into your packaged beer. My own definition of closed transfer kegging is the process of moving your fermented beer from your fermenter to your sanitized, oxygen-free keg without exposing the beer to oxygen. Within reason, of course, because we all know that there is a certain amount of oxygen that is in our finished beer. It stands to reason that if we put so much effort into not exposing the beer to oxygen in this way, that we also need to do a couple of other things to minimize exposure. Not opening the fermenter after fermentation has begun, for example. Filling all the lines used for transferring with the beer with sanitizer and pushing it out with CO2. Similar process for the keg, of course. The process I use is quite typical. Firstly, I completely fill my keg with sanitizer right up to the brim. I then hook up a line that has been purged from my fermenter to my gas inpost on my keg. Finally, I connect a line from my liquid outpost on my keg into a brew bucket. Once fermentation starts, of course, the CO2 pushes the sanitizer out of the keg, replacing it with CO2. I often daisy chain a few kegs together in a single fermentation and purge all of them this way. The amount of CO2 produced actually from fermentation is pretty astonishing. I read in a few articles that there is between 300 and 400 litres of CO2 produced by fermenting a 19 litre batch of 5% beer. Okay, so on to the actual transfer itself from the fermenter to the keg. Now, the first thing I do is actually perform a yeast dump. So out of the bottom valve of my fermenter, I'm able then to dump the yeast, take the yeast off the beer, so that I get a nice flow through into the keg. A couple of reasons I do this really. The main one though is to ensure that I don't get trub sat in the poppet on the inside of the connector onto the keg, because that will then block that. So we need a free-flowing sort of path into the keg. So I dump the yeast. You have to be careful with this, of course, because you know, the bottom valve, as you open it, sometimes it can be quite vigorous, and you don't want to have a yeast shower. That's not a very nice thing to happen. So be careful with that, of course. So once you've done that, and once you've cleared the path and you've got a nice clear path there with beer flowing through it, you obviously sanitize everything to make sure everything's sanitized, so that you don't get any infection. The next thing I do is purge the lines that I'm going to use. The beer line in particular, I purge that with sanitizer, of course, first, and then I push that out really with the CO2. So the line itself has minimal oxygen in there as well. So that's something that I also do as a little bit of insurance. The next thing I do is then connect the keg to the fermenter. So I connect the fermentation out valve, which is at the bottom, to the liquid out post on my keg. The next thing I do is then connect the top part of the fermenter. So my fermenter actually has a valve going into the fermenter on the top. I connect that to my gas in on my keg. Now, don't forget that the keg is filled with CO2. So what I want to do is enable the flow of that CO2 from the keg up into the top of the fermenter, so that CO2 is going into the fermenter as the liquid is coming out. So again, it's a completely closed transfer, so that there's no or very minimal oxygen in that entire process. Even going into the top of the fermenter, I'm putting CO2 in the top there rather than oxygen, which reduces the exposure of the beer to oxygen. Then I open the valve and let gravity do its job. I also have a short, clear piece of tubing on my beer line. This enables me to see the flow of beer moving through it, and that's useful to know when the beer's stopped flowing into the keg, or if there's bits of trub coming through, etc. Those kind of things. Or the other way I can tell whether the beer is filled up the keg or not is really to look at the condensation line on the keg itself, because I cold crash before I actually transfer, so I'm transferring cold beer into a less cold keg, and therefore you see this condensation line on the keg itself, and that's another indication of what I use to determine when the keg is full. Since adopting my closed transfer from fermenter to keg, the shelf life of my beer has improved immensely. Even my hazy IPAs are still very drinkable 3 or 4 months after kegging, and they still actually have a lot of that nice, lovely, juicy hop aroma and flavour. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you don't close transfer that you will have oxidised beer, but in my case I have objectively found that this process has improved my beer quality and shelf life of my beer immensely. So my advice would be, if you do keg, then check out the many options and the many processes used for transferring your beer from your fermenter to your keg using oxygen-free methods, and see how much your beer improves. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was of interest to you, and happy brewing. If you like what we're doing here at Something About Beer, please subscribe and give the video a like. It really does help the channel out a lot. And don't forget to ring that bell so that you're alerted to new content we put out.